we did put a call out to our YouTube community, and we asked for bad pitches, bad movie
that's
pitches,
interesting.
and we had a tremendous response. Here's just a few of our favorites. There were so many great ones to choose from. This one, the username is the Soylent Company, which
Good start.
I think that's it's not a real, anyway, a brand. So here's the pitch. So there's a guy who can't open this jar of pickles, so he runs around Los Angeles trying to find ways to open the jar of pickles. He finds himself in weird situations as well as in more and more trouble. In the end, he finds a girl that has been trying to open a jar of jelly. They manage to open the jars in the end, and then they sit down and they watch Shrek together, the end.
May I? May I?
Please.
I'll just tell you everything that I've learned and I've been taught. It's not a story. It's not a story. And a pitch has to give you a sense of story. Storytelling is everything. That's the biggest thing in this book, I think. And first of all, it's silly. It's an incident. It's a little sketch of people. I don't have any details. I don't know. I guess it's funny in a kind of grade school funny.
Sorry, I apologize.
And then the other thing is that it makes the mistake of a lot of writers. I've made it too. Is the Greek, the bringing something in at the last moment, out of nowhere, the girl appears and she's got a jar of jelly or whatever it was. Also, I have to say that I think most people would stop listening after a guy has a jar of pickles, because you haven't told me anything about the person. You haven't started with the character and what his problem is. He's got a jar of pickles he can't open. I have that problem 15, 16 times a day. Not pickles, other things, everything. Anyway, that's why I think that doesn't work. Peter may have some other thoughts about that, or he can go on to the next one.
Okay.
Well, there's no conflict.
There's no conflict.
No
okay.
conflict.
But there's a conflict in that he can't get a result that he wants, which is to open this jar.
Well, let's say a conflict is different than a problem.
Yeah. It's not going to be something that's going to carry you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
And again, if a conflict has no consequence and no import, you got nothing.
Okay. Here's another quote-unquote bad pitch from viewer Judah Harad. And Judah writes, an ex-Vietnam veteran who is also an ex-samurai who then became a police officer, who then gained superpowers from a fly, who then became a samurai fly and can kill people with one tap of a finger. The villain is a robber who gets put out within the first 15 minutes because of the one tap.
Well, I've got thoughts about it, but you go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I need you to reread it to me
Sure.
quickly.
Sure. Okay, here we go.
Thanks.
So, an ex-Vietnam veteran who is also an ex-samurai, who then became a police officer, who then gained superpowers from a fly, who then became a samurai fly and can kill people with one tap of a finger. The villain is a robber who gets put out within the first 15 minutes because of the one tap.
Okay, let's take the first half first. You just told me everything. It's too much. I was like, he's a Vietnam veteran. I'm getting all these things. You're telling me, you're loading it up front, and my head is spinning. I think it's funny. I think the funny part of it is the being infected by the fly, getting the superpowers. I also don't think you should ever call someone a villain in a pitch because it takes their humanity out. Villains are usually one-dimensional they used to be, they're not anymore. I just give you Die Hard as the perfect example. He's more interesting than the Bruce Willis character, the late, great Alan Rickman. So that's my thing. You're rushing the story and you're putting too much on the main character, on the protagonist. It's very hard to buy all of those things, so pick one. A guy gets superpowers from a fly. I want to know more about that. I don't know. Peter, you have something to add to that?
Well, for openers, we go back to the conflict issue and there's a bad guy and he kills him with one shot. why did he need killing? Why was he a bad guy? Why do we care?
Telling too much.
And how do we worry about a guy who has all these superpowers? There's nothing in there to really like or admire or be concerned about. So there's no character that you care about, what happens to him. You don't care what happens to your protagonist, you have no story.
Right.
And he's obviously invincible with all of these powers, so you have somebody that you might as well have, hey, there's a guy that's got a big steamroller, and there's a little guy that he's mad at, so he runs him over. There's a story. I mean, and if he makes him a samurai steamroller,
The reason sorry, go ahead.
No, it's silly.
Yeah.
But you've front loaded him with too many characteristics.
Right.
And if there's a good story about how he got all of these things, maybe that would draw you in. But there's no hint that you're going to hear that story. And then you've got a bad guy who you don't care about, but he dies anyway.
One of the things that I've been really pleased about with the undergraduates at LMU, and I hope that other film schools are doing more of this, is we have a class now, finally, for the last 7 years, for freshmen, that is about storytelling. It's not primarily about storytelling for film or television. It's about storytelling because all storytelling is the same and it has the same rules. Same as business, telling a story in business. And I think that by the time they become seniors, they know the basics and they wouldn't make that mistake. I think these people are trying to write bad pitches, which is, they're probably really good writers. So I just want to get that in, guys.
We see through you.
You mentioned Forrest Gump in the book, and when it was pitched, you said it took 10 years or so to actually...
8 or 10, yes. It was really, the hero of that was the producer, Wendy Feinerman, who just would... And there was a novel. So it wasn't, it had source material. And my wife and I are very close friends with someone who got $1 million to write a draft of it. The guy that wrote on Golden Pond and has an Academy Award, Ernest Thompson, also wrote a draft. I don't think a word of their drafts were used, but they did get $1 million each. So it was very, very difficult to get that done. And you look back on it, you say, and everybody's copied that structure, that goes backward and forward in time and uses the bench as to hold the structure in place. So it's an episodic movie. So I'm sorry, but what was your question?
Well, when it was pitched, were there holes that people found in it? Was the story too hard? Why should we care about this guy?
Well, I'm wondering, I've read a little bit about it, and I think it was just they were worried that it was too episodic and that he wasn't active enough, that it was the other characters. But when you really look at the movie, and I've studied the movie, I love the movie, he changes lives. His own life also changes a little, but it's the other people he affects. And if he were not there, they wouldn't change. It's unusual. It was a hard sell, as we know. But I can think of 10 or 20 movies that are simpler in structure and have the same problem getting done. Nobody knows. It's the William Goldman thing that Peter loves, that nobody knows anything, right? So, and this is, again, why I think TV is going to outshine movies and already is they take more risks. For example, I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Apple TV. It's over now. They did 4 seasons. It's about Emily Dickinson. But the way they did it, the pitch was, it's Emily Dickinson set at the time of Emily Dickinson, but we're going to have them speak in contemporary dialogue, so as if it were now, and it's brilliant. And so, the sisters, they'll all be sitting around and they'll get some bad news, and one of them says, well, that really sucks. And you would think that wouldn't work, but it's so well written. And I think that's where chances are being taken. How many movies that have come out? You can't include Coda, which won the Academy Award, because that was financed by Apple TV. So how many movies have we got that are real risk takers now? Big movies, big film companies.
But that goes back to why is it so hard to pitch in Hollywood?
Right.
It's the R word.
We always tell
Risk.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
I just think that we steer our kids toward careers in television. And this year, the seniors who wanted to go, and that was 80%, they're all either about to get their entry-level jobs or are in entry-level jobs. Because that's where the work is, television and its many forms. Film is always going to be there, but how many Maverick movies are there going to be, with Tom Cruise is going to say, I'll do this. That movie only gets made because Tom Cruise wants to be in it.
Cyan Guard is the username. So forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it. In this movie, we start with the last few seconds of the movie with a man and a woman standing atop rubble, looking out over the ocean horizon. Next scene is 30 years earlier, a similar scene followed by 50 years earlier. We keep doing this for the next 2 hours, traveling backwards thousands of years without ever drawing any connections between scenes.
Okay, this one's on you. Enjoy yourself.
Now, again, this is an intentional
Of
bad
course
pitch.
they are.
Yeah.
That's what makes them fun. Because we would have to help.
It's all the same things we've said so far.
Sure,
So
no story.
no conflict. We have no character to
No details.
really get attached to. There's no plot. There's no.
You've got to give me in the hook a sense of why they're standing on that rubble. Why are they there and why should I care?
I don't know if you'll find this interesting. Jeffrey gets to teach screenwriting, so he's working with students who want to learn screenwriting. They're very sophisticated. I get a lot of business folks that I'm trying to teach these very basic concepts to. So I do a little exercise with them where I start out saying, let me tell you something. Woman sits down at a computer, she writes something out in her word processor, hits print, and gets her document. Is that a story? And they kind of look at me quizzically and say, sounds more like an incident to me than a story. So what would make it more story-like? Well, we don't have any conflict at all. So how about if she goes to the printer and gets an error message? It doesn't do it. So now we have a little more something happening, but why do we care? Who's she? Why do we care if she gets her document printed? Well, how about we'll give her a name. Well, we'll call her Anna. She just graduated from college, and this is her first job. And she's the first person in her family to ever go to college. This is her first day on the job, and she's the only Latina working there, and she can't get her document printed. So all of a sudden now we start to feel a little bit for her because we're feeling like first person in a family, first person at the job. So we sort of like her a little bit, and she's in trouble. So now how can we beef this up a little bit? Well, how about if we find out that John in the IT department is really pissed that she got the job because he wanted his friend to get it, but they gave it to a Latina. So she didn't get it because she was good. She got it because she was female and Latin. So he mucked up the printer. So now we have a little more of a conflict. We've got somebody we can dislike. And so we keep adding these elements. And just long story short, we find out, we jack up the conflict a little. The boss needs the document. He's going on a business trip. At 5 o'clock, he's leaving the office. It's just about 5 o'clock. The printer ain't working. And then she says, I'll email it to him. Whew. Story's over.
Oh, okay.
But in each element, we're saying the more. Now, if we wanted to make this a better story, how could we care more about her? How could we make John a bigger jerk?
Right.
So all the way along, we're looking at what are the elements that make a story.
And that's very helpful, I bet, for business people because it's simple and it's
But it gives
clear.
them the essences. Right. And what we're doing is we're making it additive. Where at each step, we're saying, just this little tweak, Notice how it changes. Oh, we went from I don't care at all to I kind of care.
Right.
Oh, now I care more.
Yeah.
Ah, poor girl.
Right.
That son of a bitch.
You know, in most.
Just one last thing.
Sure.
But I
Oh,
find
I
it's
apologize.
really helpful to do it Socratically. So in each case, I don't say let's add this. It's what would make it more.
Right. Exactly.
And then we play around with answers till.
But you're also, by doing it Socratically, you are aping the way it's done in the real world. We don't just sit there and talk to people. I'll say the first, just to give another example of that, the simpler and maybe not as powerful as what Peter just did, but the first thing I was taught about writing when I was a kid is, what's the difference between the queen died, the king died, and the queen died, the king died of grief? And right away, you know, you have the makings of a story when you say grief. I'm just saying that sometimes, I mean, the other thing that's really powerful about Peter's example is it's simple, it's straightforward, and it gets specific. And I think details really matter in storytelling, and I think a lot of people rush. I've done it, I know, so I've made the mistake. You really want to tell that story, so either you tell too much or you tell too little. Did you want to give us another one? This is fun. I like this
you
game.
like this?
We might have
Okay.
invented a new game.
But just the one thing is by doing it Socratically, they're learning to ask those questions.
And by the way, if they go into a writer's room or they go into one person we interviewed, David Alpert, PepsiCo, they taught, and one of the things he was put in charge of was, he tells that great story about the Apple Watch, but is to mentor younger people because they wanted to create the next generation of leaders. And they said in a room, you don't get to listen. And it's the same in Hollywood. Those two things are identical. If you sit silently in a writer's room, goodbye. Goodbye. You're being paid a lot of money to be here to offer your,